I'm professional investigator Justin Yentis. Here we cut through the noise, dig deep, and uncover what others overlook. If you're ready to roll up your sleeves and get to the bottom of the story, you've come to the right place. Welcome to Truth Be Found. Let's get to work. The word asylum should mean safety, that America will protect you. Protect you from political violence for opposing a dictator, for assisting the U.S. military abroad, or for converting to Christianity in a country where that is not appreciated. For many, from Iran to El Salvador to Venezuela, it's become a maze of shifting rules and broken commitments. Today we're talking about the people in that maze, the law that's supposed to guide them, and what happens when the goalposts keep moving. To help us through this discussion, we're joined by Monika Sud-Devaraj. Monika is probably the most experienced immigration expert I've ever worked with. Monika, could you tell us a little about your career and how you gained the wealth of knowledge that you have on this issue?
Sure. Thanks for inviting me. So my name is Monika Sud-Devaraj, and I started working for the immigration folks, or the INS, back in 1989. And I started as what they call a co-op officer, where I did the adjudications, the green card applications, the citizenship, the deportations, the I-9 education series. And then I started on as a trial attorney or a prosecutor for the former INS before leaving the government in 2002 to join the defense side.
Okay.
So I left just before they became DHS and ICE.
Okay, gotcha. Now, I'd like to, before we talk about the current issues, I'd like to get a couple of definitions out of the way. For our listeners that might not understand what asylum really is, could you define what asylum means and like who qualifies it and what protections that should provide?
Okay. So asylum is under Section 208 of the Immigration and Nationality Act. Okay. And it is, asylum is for those people who are fleeing persecution by their government or by groups in their country that the government is unable to control. And they have to show that they are fleeing persecution on account of their race, their religion, their nationality, their political opinion, and or their membership in a particular social group. And so, for example, you see a lot of people fleeing in your discussion here, they're fleeing religious persecution back from Iran because Iran is not tolerant of other religions. And so they may take action against individuals who aren't Muslim. And so persecution isn't just discrimination. It rises to a higher level, and you have to show well-founded fear of persecution in order to win asylum.
Okay. So could you walk us through what happens when someone seeks asylum at a legal port of entry or inside the U.S.? First of all, why is it that they have to present themselves on U.S. soil at a port of entry or to a Border Patrol agent? And what is it that they have to do at that point?
So prior to this, the INS and DHS for many years had processing overseas. You were able to process at refugee asylum centers or camps. Now those, I think they're still available overseas, but they're more difficult and they're limited to how many people can be admitted as a refugee under those conditions. So most people don't go to the refugee camps. They come into the United States either illegally without papers, or they present themselves for inspection at a port of entry, and they tell the officer that they are fleeing their country and they're here to seek asylum. So that's one category of individuals.
Okay.
Then we have another category of individuals who are actually within the United States already. They could be here on legal visas, or they could be here illegally, and they have been stopped by ICE, or they were here on a legal visa and something happened in their country that changed their circumstances. So they want to seek asylum at that point, wherever they are in the process.
And so I would assume that, well, then obviously asylum is discretionary. What types of persecution do you see most often in this day and age? Let's say 2024, 2025. What are the majority of the asylum seekers claiming?
Okay. So first of all, asylum's not as discretionary as one would think.
Mm-hmm.
So if you meet the burden of establishing well-founded fear of persecution, then unless there's something in your background, criminal-wise, you're just not a good individual, for the most part, you will be granted asylum. Okay, so it's not you've met the burden, but we just don't like you. No, that's not how that.
So
it's
I guess
not discretionary in that sense.
And I guess when I say discretionary, it would be determined by whether or not the burden of a credible fear is met, or that an actual state of persecution has been established. Is that accurate?
Yes. So, most asylum cases these days are adjudicated either by USCIS, which is an affirmative application that someone filed, or by an immigration judge in removal proceedings. And every adjudicator, the judge or the officer for USCIS, is going to look at what you've said and base their decision on how credible you are as an asylum seeker, whether your story logically makes sense, whether it meets the political environment going on in the home country. They're going to look at all those factors and the case law that exists at the time on what qualifies for asylum. So in that sense, it is discretionary.
Okay.
Now, what am I seeing? I see clients from all over the world. I have a lot of individuals from India. I have individuals from Venezuela. I represented individuals from Central America, the Middle East. The majority of the claims are either political in nature or religious. There are a few that meet the membership in a particular social group. For example, there are countries that dislike or persecute individuals who are homosexual.
Mm-hmm.
So a particular social group, to meet that requirement, it is something that it's a characteristic that's immutable. You can't change that about yourself. Maybe the country might persecute individuals who have brown eyes. You can't change the color of your eyes. So that would be an example of an immutable characteristic that would qualify you for the particular social group category.
Okay. So what have you noticed anything that first-time applicants commonly misunderstand in the process, or what is a common misconception from people that are coming in seeking asylum?
There's two. One of them is they come in and they say, just because they think that they've told the inspector or the officer, I'm scared to go back, that's enough.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, that's only step one in the process. Step two is you actually have to file an asylum application, either with the judge or with U.S. Immigration, within 1 year of coming to the United States, or you lose. You automatically lose. You won't ever win asylum, even if you can meet the standard. You can never be granted asylum.
You won't ever be granted asylum if you miss that 1 year deadline.
Without a reasonable, valid justification. For example, when I came in, I might have had PTSD from whatever happened to me, and I was in a psychiatric hospital for 12 months dealing with that. That's an exception. They will allow you to file after 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
You come in and say, well, I thought I filed. I didn't know I had to do anything more. That's not going to be an exception.
Okay. Now,
so that's a big problem that I see with a lot of my clients. The second biggest problem I see is, as I said to you, asylum is for persecution, not general violence in a country or discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of individuals are fleeing just general violence happening in their country, and it's not something specific to them. For example, we see a lot of individuals fleeing the drug cartel violence in Mexico. Well, that's happening to the entire town, the entire city, the entire state or country, whatever you are in it. That's not generally going to meet asylum standards.
But if, for example, a cartel targeted you specifically, and you had worked with the police, or you had made a statement against them in the news, and they had targeted you individually, would that then change the discussion so that
it could? Okay. Very well could. Yes, it could. Now, historically, whistleblowers are not considered for asylum, but I mean, you have to make the argument and make the connections. And I have a few of those cases where I have clients who have, former police officers who have arrested cartel members, and the cartel is after them, and the government of their country can't protect them. So those individuals certainly have a case for asylum.
Okay. And I've seen in cases, for example, in Venezuela, where politically persecuted individuals have come to the United States and stated and shown that, their family members had been targeted, had been murdered by the, then Chavez regime and now Nicolas Maduro, and have been able to come and been granted political asylum in the United States. Are there other countries that are currently under those type of problems in addition to Venezuela, where political asylum seekers have been coming from on a regular basis?
I'm seeing a lot from Cameroon, because there's a crisis going on in Cameroon regarding the Anglophones, the Francophones, English-speaking, the French-speaking parts of the country, the North and South. So there's a lot of people seeking asylum from there. I have a few clients from South America that are coming in Colombia. I have quite a few clients from India that are seeking asylum. It's a combination, and it can be a combination as well, of religious and political persecution. They are, for example, Sikhs who are opposed to the current non-Sikh government, or they are opposed to the political parties in power that are maybe not Sikh. So I've seen India. I've prosecuted, when I was a prosecutor, some Chinese asylums. We still see a few of those, but they're still existence, but those were a huge number back in the early 90s with the Tiananmen Square, the one baby policy. So those happened then. I personally don't have a lot of Chinese asylums these days. So I'm not seeing as many Central Americans like Guatemala, El Salvador, Nicaragua. There were a large number from Nicaragua when the Sandinistas were in power. So
I would imagine during the Salvadorian Civil War, we had probably quite a few.
There were a lot of them as well. But that has all, I don't want to say fixed itself. I'm just going to say less turmoil now, I guess.
Right. Now, and you said that let's take El Salvador, for example. From, 1980 or so till, 94, there was the Salvadorian Civil War. And after that, there became what was a civil war turned into a gang war. And a lot of the same violence went from political to criminal. So would the same people that were persecuted by the left or the right during the Civil War be able to seek asylum if they were maybe targeted by the gangs from, MS-13 and Barrio 18 after the Civil War ended, where it's a criminal rather than political?
Generally, no. Because you still have to make that tie, the connection, the nexus between one of those 5 grounds, political opinion. Are the gangs persecuting you because of your political opinion? And is the gang something the government can't control? Yes, they can't control the gangs. At least that's what we all know. But are they persecuting you because they're gangs and they're thugs and they want money and they're extorting you? Or because, pre-1994, you were pro-left or pro-right, or why are they persecuting you?
Right.
And that is the hardest part to prove, because the gang member is not going to come up to you and say, you voted for so-and-so and therefore I'm persecuting you. I mean, that just doesn't happen.
It doesn't. So in a recent case that I was working, there was a Venezuelan national who had what I viewed as a very strong political asylum claim, and had mismanaged a form, unfortunately. And so they had moved out of one area into another and hadn't updated their new address with the immigration office. And luckily, they were able to find out about an interview that they were being called in for and get that taken care of. But there's a lot of steps to this process, and many that come in and are involved in the asylum process aren't understanding, at least from my perspective, the gravity of some of these deadlines and some of the exact nature of the forms and which forms are required at what point. Have you seen immigrants or migrants that are here seeking asylum get tripped up over just the sheer bureaucracy that is involved here?
I represent several individuals who have failed to file their asylum application for whatever reason within a year. And I have tried to fight that and said, they're not educated, they're not that sophisticated, they didn't know. But unfortunately, the courts have held that that's not an excuse.
Okay.
And so they haven't filed within the 1 year. You're pretty much done for asylum. Changing addresses. I've seen many clients fail to notify the court. The court sends a notice of the hearing and they don't show up. And the court orders them deported. And then you have to go through a motion to reopen and show, why didn't you show up? Did you not get notice? Did you ignore the notice? What happened? And I will say this though, Justin, if the individual has gone to court once, they are on notice. The court does advise them in their native language that they must keep the court apprised of changes of address. And if they've gone to court within the 1 year, the court generally advises them, you have until X date to file your asylum application.
To get that in, right.
Now, the problem we're seeing with that is this is a huge problem. With the large number of people coming in, they're not getting the court dates within the year of their arrival, if you will. So they don't go to court. They don't get that notice. They don't know that they have to do it. And I had this discussion with someone else. And I said, the best advice I can give is go to talk to an attorney, because you need to make sure that you take care of business when you're seeking asylum.
Right.
You don't just come in and say, I'm just going to find work and then forget about the rest of life. You came here with a purpose, meet that purpose first, then look for the other benefits of asylum.
So have you seen this go south in the past? Could you share a story where maybe a single lacking form or a missed date has, or a lacking signature has changed someone's trajectory completely?
So a lacking signature is not generally the court will have you sign in front of them. I mean, they might reject it initially, but I think you have a valid argument to say, look, they made every attempt pro se without an attorney to comply. Generally, you shouldn't have any issue with that one. The missing form, I'm not sure what would be missing. If it's a change of address, I mean, I've battled those cases and, we've won in certain circumstances and we've lost in others. It's hard to say. I mean, I have an actual client right now, which I'd rather not get into the details for obvious reasons, but he's facing a 1 year filing deadline. And he's from one of these countries that, he could potentially get asylum from. But he came in, he didn't take care of business for whatever reason. A whole year went by and he still didn't take care of business. And he filed an initial application 15 months after arrival.
Okay.
And now, came to me almost 20 months after arrival. It's hard to fix. It's very difficult to fix that. I don't have a valid justification. I'm trying, but I don't have a really valid justification.
Yeah.
And in his case,
it is tough.
His case is not so strong. And that's been a problem because I think one of the problems I see a lot of is people are fleeing what's happening in their countries, but they're unable to express in detail what happened to them.
I was involved with an interview several months ago and had to go in and help support the evidence of political violence in South America. And I'll tell you what was helpful to us is that we had a direct nexus between the asylum seeker and the opposition party to the party in power in this country, and we had documented links between them and other politicians who had been assassinated and family ties. And so bringing that all together was very helpful. And, that case is still under advisement. I would hope that it would go in our favor, but not everyone has that. And many times, I've conducted interviews with folks and they've got generalized stories, but without a lot of documentation to prove that, and without a strong nexus to show that their situation is specifically tied to a problem in the area or in the country.
So the courts have held that when you're fleeing a country for asylum reasons, persecution, they're not going to expect you to grab your birth certificate and grab the threatening note and you're fleeing. So they have said it's not necessarily required. However, if it's a document that can be reasonably obtained, maybe after the fact, or, maybe it was, let's say you were beaten and you were in the hospital and you have your hospital records and you're home with you before you flee. Maybe you bring your hospital records with you. So if it's something that can be reasonably expected, then you should present it. But I've won cases without any documentation because when you're fleeing your country, you don't stop to think, oh, I should collect this and I should collect that and I should collect this and bring all this with me. Most people who are running away aren't going to remember all of that stuff.
Correct.
So it's not mandatory. The key is a detailed story, a detailed affidavit, or, the facts, and the credibility of the witness. If you say, for example, I was beaten and tortured and held in a jail. If that's all you got, the judge is going to say, that's probably not enough. But if you say the jail cell was 6 by 6 feet and there was no roof on it, or we only had a bucket to relieve ourselves, and we only got bread and water, the more detail, the more information that sounds believable you can provide, the more credible you are.
Right. That makes sense. Now, what we've been seeing in recent months is that there's some confusion over the change of rules. And I think that the confusion to go through the immigration process on a good day is difficult or is extreme. But that, I feel, gets magnified when you've got changes in the rules during the process. Could you explain what we've been hearing a lot lately about the CBP-1 appointment system? And I know that was a hot button issue during the last several years. Could you tell me what that system was intended to do and why it mattered so much to the process?
So CBP-1 came out to allow the individuals to make appointments rather than, I guess, as people put it, charging the border, I guess, for lack of a better word. And so you waited in Mexico and you made your appointment, and then you were interviewed, given a credible fear, and then placed in removal proceedings in front of the judge. You were allowed to come in. I guess, for lack of a better word, and more orderly fashion. I don't know how else to describe it. Then it was taken away. And what happened is, when it was taken away, they canceled the parole or the permission to come into the United States, and they detained everybody, or are detaining people. And that's what's causing the problem. And you're not alone in the confusion. I mean, I joke sometimes, like, I need a spreadsheet to keep track of where we are on what particular issue on any given day, because today it's yes, tomorrow it's no, the next day it's maybe, or we're back to yes. So you just got to keep track of it.
Right.
So what's happening now is a lot of those people who came in on CBP-1 are reporting to ICE, because that was part of the process. You were paroled in, allowed to come in, but you're reporting. And now when you're reporting, they are detaining you and keeping you in custody while you fight out your case.
Okay. And so I had some South Americans who were fleeing political persecution about 10 years ago. And rather than making an appointment out, in South America, Their option was to present themselves at the border at, I believe it was Eagle Pass in southern Texas, and look for a border patrol officer to present themselves to. So they ended up crossing the river and finding an officer and making their, getting into the system that way. When CBP-1 happened, rolled out, was the only difference that person could have then made an appointment to have that interaction with
Pretty much.
with Border
I would
Patrol?
say so, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
And so let me just say this. If that same individual did that today, even with CBP-1, let's just assume they were there. They didn't want to wait in Mexico. They just didn't want to. And they did the same thing. They crossed the river at Eagle Pass or El Paso and came through the United States. Today, the administration is using the expedited removal process to remove these individuals versus 10 years ago, they may or may not have. They would have just put them in proceedings. It was all very nonchalant, if you will.
right. Now, the first ones that I personally saw come in and witnessed was in, I think, 2016. And some folks came on tourist visas. They were political refugees, or political asylum seekers, I should say, to be accurate, and came in on a tourist visa and then sought political asylum. That, I suppose, would still be potential under this current process.
Of course.
Okay.
But so one of the arguments made in the day, and still probably made today, is, did you tell the U.S. Embassy when you applied for your visitor visa that you were afraid in your country? And so that's one of the arguments the government always brings up is, why didn't you tell them then to apply abroad? And I guess the counter is, I'm in the country that's trying to persecute me. Do you really think I want to let people know I'm fleeing? So
right. And I know that
it goes both ways.
That some of the countries that folks have had to flee for political persecution were seeking verification that these people would return. And so I know that in some cases that I've reviewed, some documents have been shown to home countries to try and get out of the country to begin with. And
by U.S. government officials? Or
no.
who are we talking about?
No, by foreign government officials.
I mean, we can't control that. But
Correct.
if the U.S. government were to do that, that's almost an automatic grant of asylum.
What was it? What do you go into that? What does that mean?
So let's say, for example, that you're seeking asylum here, and the U.S. government leaks during the process, not after, during the process, leaks to the persecuting government, hey, we want to verify this document that the guy was a member of, I don't know, whatever anti-government organization back there. Yeah, that's a no-no.
That's a big
You do
problem.
that and you wait. That's called an automatic win.
Right. How do the Biden era and the Trump era approaches differ? And not just on paper, but in execution for real people coming across or seeking asylum, let's say?
I think the Trump era is using more of the expedited removal detention threat than the Biden administration, because I think people think or thought that by coming in and seeking asylum, they would be free in the United States to live, work while their case was going on. And what the administration is doing is they're kind of changing that game a little bit by detaining everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm seeing, and I tell my clients this, if you're genuinely afraid of returning to your country, then you stay detained and fight it out. Because if you don't, and you tell the judge, I'm scared, but I don't want to stay detained and I'll go back to my country, that sends the wrong message for you and for future asylum seekers.
Right.
Because if you're genuinely afraid of being killed, tortured, persecuted, then it doesn't matter where you are when you're fighting out your case. It shouldn't.
Mm-hmm. That
I
makes
mean,
sense.
I'm not saying, it's a hotel. It's not the Ritz-Carlton to be detained. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it's better to be detained and fight out your fear of return to your country than to tell the judge, well, if you're going to detain me, I'll just give it up and go home. That sends the wrong message.
Mm-hmm. Now, you and I were discussing the credible fear interview. Can you explain why that is a foundational part of this process, or such an important, vital step?
So that started whack with in 96, 97 with the change in the law. So
Mm-hmm.
it's part of the expedited removal process. So the expedited removal says that if you enter the country and you're here less than, now we're using the 2 years, and you were caught within X number of miles of the border, we can summarily deport you to your country without a hearing in front of a judge. The exception being if you claim fear of return to your country. So if you claim fear, then we will have what they call, let's call it a preliminary interview.
Okay.
Preliminary interview, which is the credible fear. They will get a hold of an asylum officer and conduct a preliminary interview, question and answers of why are you scared to return to your home country. Generally, for the most part, most people pass a credible fear. My own kind of guess at that is they want you to have your opportunity. They don't want to just, one officer makes the call that, no, you don't.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's not to say some people don't pass the credible fear. They might say, I'm fleeing Mexico because the cartels have taken over my city. Well, that in and of itself is probably not enough. So they might get a negative credible fear, but they can ask for review of that in front of an immigration judge. And then the judge will either agree that the negative credible fear stands and the individual gets removed, or they'll say, no, we believe there's enough here to go on to the second step, and that's presenting an entire asylum case with evidence, testimony, etc. And then they will be placed in removal proceedings to have a hearing in front of the judge.
Currently, there's a class action lawsuit going on in D.C. that alleges, and I pulled up their complaint this week, that recent rules have heightened the screening standard for credible fear interviews and have authorized officers to consider adverse factors that could previously be considered only in full removal hearings. Is that something that you've seen, or have you seen rule changes that changes the process for asylum seekers in this administration to show credible fear?
Like I said, some days I need a spreadsheet to keep up with all the class actions and the
Right.
lawsuits. So I'm not familiar with that one. I personally have not, no.
Okay.
I mean, my clients, when I see their notices to appear, removal proceedings, the credible fear, so far I've heard stories, but I personally have not had that happen.
Okay.
So I don't really know that I'm the person to answer that question in that way.
Okay. The other claims that have been made are that if the asylum officer finds no credible fear of persecution, the non-citizen is removed unless they request review before an immigration judge, which
Right.
should be the process to begin with. They claim that review is brief, often lasting less than 10 minutes, and it comes with limited opportunity for attorney participation or the submission of evidence, and happens just days after the negative credible fear finding. Is that a rule change, or is that consistent with what has been going on for several years?
I think it's consistent. I don't think it's 10 minutes. I think it's like maybe half an hour. Yeah, because it's not a full evidentiary hearing. It's not. And it's really for the judge to listen to you and kind of, do I get that warm and fuzzy feeling that you're telling me the truth and you have a fear of return to your country?
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
So,
that makes sense.
And it's really hard. I don't get involved at that stage as an attorney. There are attorneys who get involved at that stage. I generally don't. My practice doesn't allow me to do that. That's very involved.
Mm-hmm.
But if your attorney's involved, they usually go and they can present some stuff to help with the credible fear.
Okay.
Or at least give it to the client and say, present this.
And we see this a lot in criminal court, where someone is maybe facing a very serious charge, and they might have an actual innocence, opportunity, but they get worn down by a long incarceration sentence or a long time in county jail, and they think, well, if I just plead guilty, I can get out of the jail and get to the prison and at least know what's going to happen next. And I've seen people who have pled guilty and then obviously later regretted it significantly when they realize, outside of the county jail, that pressure is
the
off.
Consequences. Yeah.
Right. Then the consequences are real. And I would assume that when we've got refugees or asylum seekers in, Alligator Alcatraz for what they're calling it, they might see that this voluntary removal is a lifeline. It's an opportunity to at least get out of a horrible situation, and might not understand this bureaucratic maze that they're going through. Have you seen folks make those same voluntary removal petitions or acceptance and then later regret that?
Well, I don't know about later, but because if they're deported, yeah. But my client who's, facing that right now, and I told him, and I'm just going to be blunt on your broadcast. I said, I don't want any whining. No whining. You're going to be detained for several months. If you want to fight this out, no whining, because it's not Club Fed. It's not, the Ritz-Carlton. I get it. But if you give it up now, you will not have a chance again in the future.
Right.
And if the only reason you're giving it up is because you don't want to stay detained, in my opinion, that I get it. I'm not detained. I get it. I totally understand that. But I told him, your choice is stay detained and fight it out. You may not win. I don't know, but at least you've given it your best shot versus throwing in the towel and getting deported back to a country where you claim you're going to be killed.
Mm-hmm. It's a tough decision to make.
It's very tough.
And I'm not sure that, and maybe you can shed some light on this, how many people have advisors that can talk straight to them and explain the situation to them. Are they all granted attorneys if they don't have one?
No. Immigration court, it's not a public defender system. If you want an attorney, you got to find one and hire one.
Mm-hmm. And that's something that I've found is a common misconception for those who have never been in around immigration proceedings. They see on TV, if you can't afford an attorney, one will be appointed to you, and think that applies across the board. But as you just explained, that's not the case here.
It's not.
So for those that are here that might not have the resources for an attorney and that are detained facing religious or other persecution abroad, what are we doing as a country, as a policy, to prevent those people from being sent back to places where they're in danger?
Now we're not doing anything. That's the problem. In the past, there were organizations that were receiving federal funding, private funding, donations, that were in some of these detention centers that had attorneys that would help them prepare cases and put together cases and potentially even represent them in the final hearings in front of the court. But with this administration, those fundings have been cut, and those organizations are not able to do as much as they were in the past.
So that puts actual lives at risk. We have right now a couple dozen religiously persecuted Christians, some of which have gone back to Tehran under various circumstances that are still being looked into. But it would appear that if they did not have proper representation, whether or not they could afford it, those options to fully understand the ramifications of the process were not there.
It's unfortunate, but that is true. I mean, that's what's happening. I mean, when I was, and I'm not trying to be on a soapbox or anything, when I was a prosecutor and we had pro se individuals, it was kind of a dual hat, and the judge also kind of wore a dual hat.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, we're not here, at least I wasn't there to say, you're going home, you're going home. Let's get out all the facts. Let's get out everything that's coming out, and then the judge makes a decision. And I would like to see or hope that's what's still going on. That if they're not represented, that the government is somehow not being as hard, maybe trying to elicit the truth and the facts, and the judge is also helping out a little bit. I know that's my utopian look on the world, but I know that's not what really is happening. I like to think that's happening, but there are attorneys out there who do pro bono and low income, low cost work. The answer is not simple. It's unfortunate.
It is.
But I mean, if you have the evidence and you can testify credibly about what's happened to you and provide detail, it really doesn't require a lot of magic. It doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
It shouldn't.
You know, in the legal world, we often talk about the mental state, and I always go back to negligence versus recklessness. And for our listeners out there, in short, negligence is akin to carelessness, going a few miles over the speed limit in a turn, accidentally clipping another car. Recklessness, really ups the ante. In short, it's knowing full well the danger of what you're doing and kind of throwing caution to the wind and doing it regardless. It's more of a conscious disregard for the well-being of another, or the rule of law, safety. And from what I've seen in some of the religious persecution cases, it would appear personally that the U.S. is acting with an extreme form of recklessness. We know full well the risks that Christian converts will face being sent to Tehran, or cooperating gang informants being sent to El Salvador, or supporters of the democratic process being sent back to Caracas, Venezuela. And yet we're not taking every precaution to prevent that from occurring. In fact, like you were stating, we're cutting off the lifelines for the organizations that were helping to prevent this from happening. Monika, I would ask you, who have been in this process for a long time and have seen the ability for outside groups and other attorneys to be hired and supported by nonprofits and by the government, and you've seen that taken away. Are there any reforms or safeguards that would help us to restore the integrity of our process?
I mean, other than bringing back these groups and paying and funding, or, there's not a lot, because there's a lot of people, as you say, who are not familiar with the process and don't understand. And, when I worked for the government, and even on this side, these organizations and groups are definitely a benefit.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't understand why you would want to eliminate an organization that's helping the courts even be a little bit more efficient.
Right.
I'll give you an example. There is a group in Arizona that's called the Florence Immigrant Refugee Rights Project. I'm sure you've heard of it.
Oh, yeah.
Their funding has been almost virtually eliminated, okay? But they used to go in and give what we call a rights presentation. I don't know how long ago, but it's been a while, to the individuals, and they would explain the different forms of cases that you might qualify for, ways to fight to stay, and this and that. And it helped, in my opinion, the individuals understand that, I might have this and I'll stay and fight, but I don't have anything, and I'll just tell the judge today, my first appearance, and I just want to go home. I mean, I gave it my best shot and I'm going to go home. Why wouldn't you want some people like that there?
Right.
When you have an individual who doesn't speak Spanish, who speaks some native dialect from Central America, but the attorney is able to connect with someone who speaks that dialect and Spanish and do a dual translation or whatever and help expedite that process in front of the court. Why wouldn't you want them there? Why wouldn't you? If the attorneys are able to help prepare applications so you don't have to continue the case to allow the uneducated, unsophisticated individual to complete an application, why wouldn't you? I mean, none of it makes sense. It's like you're trying to be efficient. You want to move cases. You want to do all of this, but you're hindering it by eliminating these people who are actually helping you.
Right.
They're actually helping.
It throws mud in the gears of the system.
Makes no sense.
No.
Makes no sense. And that, to me, is like, we need those organizations back. We need people out there. We need help. It's heartbreaking. It really is heartbreaking. I see clients in my office all the time. Dad was driving on the street, some ridiculousness about the blinker light was busted or something, and he got stopped, and then ICE got called, and now he's detained till whenever we can win this case or he loses. It's heartbreaking. That shouldn't be happening.
Mm-hmm.
Why are we going down these paths? Why? You know, it started, and I'll get on this soapbox a little bit. We started with deport the criminals. Okay, got no problem with that. You know, you've committed all these crimes, you know, you're a murderer, you're a drug dealer, whatever. Go for it. Knock yourselves out. But and deport the people who are, who lost their cases and are just here still. Okay, I got no problem with that. They had their due process. They did whatever go for it. But why are you targeting the grandmas and the grandpas who haven't done anything? And the laborers who are working in the farms and the meatpacking plants who, all of a sudden the cost of a head of lettuce is now $5 for a head of lettuce because you've taken all the people away and deported them.
Mm-hmm.
Why? That's not what the goal was.
No, it's not. It's not. And I know the many of the attorneys that I work with have seen the number of significant criminal cases plummet, and especially those that are in indigent defense have seen the actual violent criminal drug trafficking, human trafficking cases all but disappear, and you're filled up with illegal reentries, and which is a 81326 and 1325s illegal presence in the U.S. So I want to thank you for coming on today and giving us a professional's, an expert's opinion and an expert advice on this situation. And
you're welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. And we'll put your website in the show notes for anyone that needs immigration assistance and consulting. It would be my first call. Every signature on a form, every hearing, every deportation flight carries a human cost. True justice isn't found in legal processes or policies. It's found in the people who continually fight to make laws and make this country that we love more just. I want to thank Monika for her willingness to help us understand what's happening behind the headlines and what it means to those still searching for safety and the promise of freedom in the United States. For more information on asylum rights, refugee advocacy, and how you can help protect due process for all, visit the resources linked in today's episode. I hope today's conversation challenged your understanding of immigration and asylum seekers. The truth has to be found and acted upon. Come be a part of the conversation on our social media channels. Thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in to Truth Be Found. The hunt for answers never stops, and neither do we. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us online to stay in the loop. Remember, truth has a way of coming to light. Until next time, keep your head up and your eyes sharp.